yours. Welcome to EMS at Sea Level. Today I'm joined by my old friend Randall Sherman. Randall, thanks for joining me, and thanks for all the work you do for the industry in terms of getting data out there.
Thank you.
I just read the press release you sent out for the latest report, and I'm excited to see more data on it. But there are a couple of things that really stood out to me. Some impressive performance in 2022 generally. You mentioned 9.5% growth and 40 billion in growth in those top numbers. That's pretty impressive, and it seems to have exceeded the growth of the OEM market by about double, apparently. What do you put that down to? Is that simply more outsourcing? Is the total available market growing more outsourcing as opposed to insourcing?
Certainly, there's a reemergence of a lot of those products. When we had COVID, we had trouble getting parts, obviously, and a lot of people started reinvesting in just hardware like PCs and computers. So there were replacement buys, and then there was of course a big surge in the smartphones. So those two sectors did particularly well. They didn't do quite so well this year, but the last year before that, they really did capitalize on that market. So and I think nowadays the model is just don't build it, just buy it.
Yeah, it's quite compelling, isn't it? Yeah, it makes sense. And when we look at one of the first things I always look at when I get the report is what's going on at the very top, and the those Taiwanese players in amongst the top 10 that really dominate the numbers. And sometimes just to make sense of the numbers, you need to take a couple of those out so you can, kind of see what's going on in the broader market, because there's normally such a huge impact. But Foxconn, for example, quite a depressed level of growth in the industry, and even Pegatron were pretty low. Is that a I was thinking through it myself, and I'm thinking it must be one of two things. It's either geopolitics and the dominant China footprint, and that idea of shifting away from that, or perhaps it's the markets they're in, which are much more consumer-driven markets that are perhaps more impacted by the inflation figures and the risk of recession that we saw in the second half of 2022. Which is it, or have I completely missed something else?
No, you haven't. I think the COVID thing was a big correction point in a way. Everyone seems to have bounced back really, really well. You can go look at the segments, and some of the fastest growing ones were ones you wouldn't expect, but like medical grew like 55% this last time. Yeah, and defense did too, about 50%. So there's definitely a lot of demand there for those kind of products. And the one that was flat was the smartphones. It's just there. I mean, it's pretty much a constant level. It wasn't a big spike or anything, but it was by far the largest segment. So it's like 166 billion or something. And if you go down and look at who supplies that, this is where Foxconn comes in. Yeah, and Pegatron make 100 billion, sorry, in hardware for the industry. Most of it going to Apple. So and Pegatron, Wistron, something.
Wistron did better. And there's some interesting new players, or not new players, but players that have really grown in Asia that are kind of curious, like BYD, for example, which is, is it a contract manufacturer? Is it a car maker? Is it what is it? It's kind of a difficult one to figure out. I think when I look at some of the Asian companies in particular, it's really hard to identify their mix of product. How do you go about doing that? And do you see, is there a kind of a a resurgence in that ODM model that was popular, perhaps more for laptops and PCs and things. We're now seeing for, maybe automotive platforms, those kind of products.
Yeah, there's definitely a resurgence there. And that's by far the most volume that the companies work with. So I don't know. I think we're just lucky that we're doing so well. Right. This last year, I think the growth was 9.5%. The year before that was 9.9%. And that's mainly in the core products, the information technologies.
Yeah.
So, but you got these niches coming up, like industrial and medical. They both did well, and automotive.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's fortunately we can say the future looks bright.
Yeah, no, I agree with you, Randall. And I think when I look at it, what's also very positive is those companies haven't just grown their top line; they've grown their bottom line as well. We've gone through a probably at least a 5-year period where the industry seems to have figured out how to make some money finally, and that that's fundamentally important to its growth. But we do seem to be seeing some much stronger bottom line performance than we've seen in the past, particularly last year, even when they were sucking huge amounts of cash into inventory to deal with the shortage of components. What do you see that as? Do you see that as realism from the OEMs that they can pay a decent price for their EMS and they're not just thinking about price when there are other disruptions around? Or is it efficiency from the EMS point of view?
Well, it's definitely efficiency, and they have the most sophisticated operations that are largely robotic, and they know how to drive the costs down. And by just doing iterations, they can get much more of a higher margin. Now, the margins aren't that great. They're about 2%, 3% or something, but the Foxconn, that comes out to be $5-6 billion.
Yeah.
And so they have that to deal with. So, but it is amazing how these ODMs have continued to grow, and it just shows their business model is working, and they're making money. They made more money than the EMS guys last year.
I think it's fascinating. And, I see some of the EMS guys, and we've seen this time and time again in the past, that they get tempted by, ODM style products or white label style products. But when you've got IP in a specific product area, it makes sense to kind of build that platform model. And that can be very attractive to some brands that don't want to reinvent the wheel. They just want to brand and market a product themselves.
Right. Yeah. And some companies just know how to do this business, like Zollner or Scanfil or Creation. They know how to leverage their assets, and they're very picky about who their customers are. I mean, that's a strategy, right?
It is.
Pick out the bad ones,
Yeah, I think it's an important strategy. And you mentioned Scanfil as an example there. I think it's really interesting when you look at the geography of the markets and where the performance is there, and which countries have the better gross margin, and perhaps which countries have more outsourcing as opposed to in-house manufacturing. Scandinavia seems to be a standout and seems to have just done very, very well in the last decade. I look at, companies like Note, for example. We saw the GPV Enix merger this year, which has created another $1 billion European EMS business. It just seems to be a really strong area. Is that a maturity thing, or do you think it's?
I think it's maturity. I mean, like I said, they're picking their customers and their contracts, and they're doing a lot of, I wouldn't say low volume, but say high mix, high complexity stuff, and so they can charge what they want. And the commodity stuff, the TVs and the PCs and all that, that's just a it's it's not the most attractive market for making money. I'll put it that way.
No, it's a me too, and it's really hard work, isn't it, in those areas? I just wanted to go back before we wrap up to the whole geopolitics thing. We hear a lot about things like reshoring, but more recently terms like friendshoring and ally shoring, and this perhaps desire to decouple a little bit with China, or kind of reduce the dominance on that.
Yeah.
When you look at the hard numbers, do you see a big shift there? Do you see a change, and how does that impact, for example, the United States as they really try to push to reshore manufacturing that's been gone quite a long time?
Well, China had a kind of a close call there, because with the zero COVID tolerance, it just sort of shut down factories and work.
Yeah.
But they bounced back. In fact, I was thinking it was going to be much worse than it was, but and so that's good that they're into they rebuilt the model.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's,
so you see a continued mix of kind of certain products being very attractive to the Chinese market, and obviously they've got a huge domestic market there as well as a global market now. And
the M&A market this last period has just been all over the place. I mean, all the European guys, the GPBs, with Phoenix, the Tech with Sigma Point, Pegatron, Bacraw, Scanfield, Core, Zoller, Note. They all were
absolutely buying. Yeah.
And that's where the growth comes from.
Yeah, that consolidation. Do you see that consolidation continuing, or what do you expect this year? More of the same, or do you think people are becoming a bit more opportunist and looking for companies that maybe have struggled a bit with the supply chain problems?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think there's going to be a lot more activity. And even some of the big ones may fall or consolidate, like Celestica, Benchmark, or
it's a long time since we've seen a really big one, like when Flexports Electron, for example.
Right.
It's interesting when you see those big ones. I guess the biggest one we saw in the last few years was Astil Flash and USI, which is kind of interesting. Yeah, more of the I think more of the same in that area as well. That continued consolidation, and there seems to be a understanding that there's value in scale, and when you look at the top 50, it even bottoms out at something like 440 million. That's a pretty substantial EMS company to even get into the 50.
Well, they're mainly buying customers. That's what they want, and facilities and capacity. So that's one way to get it fast.
Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely. A lot more of that. So we're going to see a lot more of that going on.
Good stuff. Well, Randall, thanks so much for your time. Keep doing what you're doing. I think it's hugely valuable for the industry, and it's hugely important to be able to figure out where you are as an EMS company in terms of your performance, and look at what else is going on in the industry, as well as looking at where the key opportunities are. So thanks for your time, and thank you for your work.
Anytime. Okay.